John never thought a simple act of hiring a housekeeper could change everything. After losing his wife in a tragic accident and watching his young son Ethan struggle with paralysis, he'd built walls around his heart and his home. But when he secretly watched the new housekeeper, Mary, playing and connecting with Ethan in a way he hadn't been able to, John realized that love and presence could heal far more than money or rules ever could. John's life had changed in an instant, the kind of instant that made him feel like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. One morning, he woke up to a phone call that would alter everything he knew about family, love, and loss. His wife, Laura, had been in a car accident, one so sudden and cruel that it left her gone forever, and their young son, Ethan, paralyzed from the waist down. The image of the overturned car haunted him endlessly, and even the sound of his son crying in the hospital after the accident would replay in his mind at unexpected moments. For a man who had spent his life in control, managing companies, making deals, and solving problems, there was nothing he could do to fix this. No spreadsheet, no plan, no schedule could undo what had happened. The weeks after the accident were the hardest. John tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, but every room in the house reminded him of what was lost. The echo of Laura's laughter, the smell of breakfast she used to make, the stack of Ethan's favorite picture books, they were constant reminders of the life he once had, and the family he no longer could return to. He found himself retreating into his work, spending long hours at the office, taking meetings that blurred together, answering emails, and pretending that business mattered more than the pain that was consuming him. In the evenings, he would come home exhausted, almost robotic, unable to speak to his son, unsure how to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. Ethan would sit in his wheelchair in the living room, his small hands gripping the armrests, eyes wide with a combination of curiosity and confusion, waiting for a father who felt too broken to respond. John had hired several caregivers over the months. They were qualified, experienced, and recommended by agencies, but none of them could break through the barrier that had formed between him and Ethan. The caregivers treated Ethan with a mixture of professional distance and pity, seeing only his paralysis and his limitations instead of the vibrant, curious child who still loved to explore and play. John would watch them through the corners of his eyes and feel a deep frustration. They were following instructions, administering medications, helping with meals, but no one could make Ethan smile the way Laura used to. And John knew deep down that it was not their fault. It was the fault of grief, of trauma, of a father who had locked himself away emotionally in an attempt to cope with the unbearable pain. He wanted to be there for Ethan, he truly did, but every time he tried, he was reminded of the accident, of his wife's last moments, and of the helplessness that had gripped him since that day. In an effort to ensure Ethan's safety and to understand what was happening when he was not there, John had installed cameras throughout the house. He justified it to himself as a necessary precaution. After all, he couldn't risk hiring someone who might harm his son, intentionally or not. The cameras were discreetly placed in common areas, in corners that offered full views without being obvious. He would check the footage after work, scrolling through hours of recordings, looking for any sign of neglect or mishandling. What he expected was either confirmation that his son was safe or evidence that he needed to find someone else. What he did not expect was the way his heart would respond when the unexpected appeared on screen. Mary had been hired only 2 weeks earlier, a housekeeper recommended by a friend. Her responsibilities were simple: keep the house clean, prepare meals, and ensure Ethan's daily needs were met. She was organized, efficient, and professional. But John quickly noticed something else. The footage began to reveal a side of Mary that no one had anticipated. She would sit on the floor with Ethan, letting him explore his surroundings, talking to him, laughing with him, making him feel seen and valued as a person rather than a patient or a project. She did not treat him with pity or cold professionalism. Instead, she matched him at his level, played with him using pots and wooden spoons, and responded to his attempts at communication with genuine joy. Ethan's laughter filled the rooms in a way that John had not heard in months, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel something other than guilt and pain. Watching Mary on the recordings, John felt a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had spent months trying to understand how to connect with his son, how to coax him into smiles, How to be a father without breaking down under the weight of grief. Yet here was someone he barely knew, doing in a few minutes what he had struggled to achieve for months. She was patient, attentive, and intuitive. She noticed the little things, the way Ethan's fingers brushed over the rim of a pot, the tilt of his head when he wanted more attention, the tiny expressions of pride when he managed to make a sound or move slightly in his chair. John felt his chest tighten, realizing that he had been absent in the ways that mattered most. He had been present physically, but absent emotionally, too consumed by his own grief to notice the needs of his son. The more he watched, the more he understood that Mary was not just helping Ethan, she was teaching John without even speaking directly to him. She was showing him what it meant to truly engage with a child, to meet them where they were, to make the effort to see the world through their eyes. John felt a wave of emotions he could not name: admiration for Mary's courage and compassion, shame for his own failures, hope that perhaps he could learn to be a father again. He realized that the love he had thought was lost forever in his family had not disappeared, it had been obscured by grief. And someone had gently lifted the veil to remind him it was still there. Mary's care extended beyond physical tasks. She comforted Ethan during moments of fear, sang softly to calm him, encouraged him to explore, and celebrated every small victory as if it were monumental. John watched a video of helping Ethan practice small movements, cheering when he succeeded, not in a condescending way, but with genuine excitement. And in that moment, John understood that being present for a child required more than ensuring their needs were met. It required empathy, patience, and a willingness to engage deeply, even when it was uncomfortable or emotionally taxing. It required being willing to face the pain of loss while still creating moments of joy. That evening, John made a decision that would alter the trajectory of their lives. He left work early, drove home with a sense of urgency he had not felt in months, and found Ethan in the kitchen with Mary, exactly as he had seen on the screen. Seeing the scene in real life was both overwhelming and transformative. He witnessed the happiness on his son's face, the warmth and attention Mary offered, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of confidence in his ability to reconnect. He realized that he had been hiding from his grief, allowing it to dictate his presence and his parenting, and now he had a chance to change that. John knelt beside Ethan, unsure of the words or actions that could bridge the months of distance. Mary encouraged him gently, guiding him to join in a simple activity, showing him that even small acts of engagement could rebuild bonds. The first hesitant attempts at interaction were awkward, but as John continued, he began to rediscover the joy of fatherhood. Ethan responded with shy smiles and laughter, his trust gradually returning. John understood that the process of healing would be slow and ongoing, but it had begun, and that was enough to sustain him. From that day forward, Mary became more than a housekeeper. She became a partner in rebuilding a family fractured by tragedy. John attended therapy, learned to cope with his emotions, and prioritized being present for Ethan. Their routines shifted to include shared meals, playtime, and moments of connection that went beyond physical care. Ethan's progress, both emotional and physical, became a source of hope and motivation for John. He learned that love required courage, that healing required vulnerability, and that sometimes, help can come from the most unexpected places. Through the weeks and months that followed, John discovered the transformative power of empathy and presence. He saw how small gestures, a shared laugh, a hand held during a moment of fear, a song sung softly could mend wounds that money, rules, and schedules could not. He began to understand that while grief would always be a part of their lives, it did not have to define their future. And in Mary's unwavering dedication, he found a model for how to parent with love, patience, and humanity, ultimately giving Ethan the childhood he deserved despite the tragedy that had struck their family. The weeks after Laura's accident were relentless for John. Each morning began with a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, a reminder that his wife was gone and that his son, Ethan, had been robbed of the mobility and carefree innocence that most children took for granted. The house felt vast and empty, every room echoing with the absence of laughter and life. Even the smallest details of his routine seemed hollow without Laura's presence, the coffee she used to make perfectly every morning, the way she organized Ethan's clothes, the little notes she left to make them both smile. John tried to keep going, throwing himself into work with a kind of mechanical precision, but nothing could fill the void. Meetings, emails, reports, all of it felt meaningless compared to the quiet despair of his son sitting in his wheelchair, watching the world pass by without participating. John's grief manifested in many ways. Sometimes it was anger at the universe for being so cruel, anger at himself for not being able to prevent the accident, anger at a life that suddenly felt unfair. Other times it was exhaustion, a profound fatigue that settled into his bones and made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. He would leave for work before Ethan awoke, returning late in the evenings, moving through the house with the careful deliberation of someone tiptoeing around a minefield. The house had become a place of routine, not of connection. Meals were eaten quietly, bedtime was rushed, and conversation with Ethan had all but disappeared. John found it easier to avoid the painful reminders of loss than to face them, and in doing so, he distanced himself from the one person who needed him the most. Ethan, for his part, was aware of the change, even if he didn't fully understand it. He sensed his father's withdrawal, felt the weight of the grief that hung in the air, and responded with quiet, tentative gestures for attention. He would try to speak, to ask questions, to reach for affection, but often John was too consumed by his own pain to notice. Ethan's wheelchair became both a tool and a barrier, allowing him to move independently in small ways, but also a constant reminder of the accident and the limitations it imposed. John recognized the irony that he was physically present for his son but emotionally absent, unable to bridge the growing distance between them. In an effort to manage the chaos of their new reality, John tried to establish some structure. He hired caregivers and babysitters, following recommendations, checking credentials, and trusting the assurances of agencies. The goal was simple: ensure Ethan's physical needs were met, keep him safe, and maintain some semblance of routine in the home. But as the weeks went by, John realized that none of the caregivers could provide what Ethan truly needed. They were competent and professional, but there was a detachment in their interactions. They treated Ethan as a patient or a project, addressing his needs without engaging with his personality or spirit. Meals were served, exercises were guided, and hygiene routines were followed. But the warmth and emotional connection that had once filled the home were missing. John began to understand that the gap he felt was not simply because of his own absence. It was because no one was actively working to bridge the emotional distance that had formed after Laura's death. John's frustration grew as he watched the caregivers come and go. Some were overly cautious, tiptoeing around Ethan as if they were afraid to provoke any discomfort or distress. Others were brisk and businesslike, completing their duties efficiently but without any attempt at forming a bond. In both cases, Ethan responded with quiet disengagement. He followed instructions, but the spark in his eyes, the spark that once lit up at the sight of his father's or mother's smile, was dimmed. John felt a mixture of guilt and helplessness. He knew that the caregivers were doing their jobs, but he also knew that what Ethan needed went far beyond the physical and practical. He needed a connection, a sense that he was seen, heard, and valued beyond the limitations of his body. To try to manage this, John began observing more closely. He would arrive home earlier, check on the caregivers' interactions, and make notes of what seemed to work or fail. He questioned himself constantly. Was he expecting too much? Was it unfair to want more than competent care? He realized that what he craved was something could not be measured in schedules or checklists. It was a presence, an emotional engagement, a willingness to truly see and connect with Ethan as a person, not just as a child in need of assistance. Every failure he observed in others felt like a reflection of his own inadequacy, a reminder that he had been absent for months, unable to find the energy to provide the connection Ethan deserved. During this period, John's evenings were long and empty. He would sit in the living room, scrolling through photos and videos of Ethan before the accident, remembering the way his son's face lit up at the smallest joys. He remembered Laura's laughter, her gentle guidance, and the effortless way they had shared moments of play and discovery. Those memories were bittersweet, a mixture of warmth and pain. He realized that the absence of these moments now was not just a consequence of Ethan's condition, but also of his own withdrawal. John had built walls around himself, walls he thought were protective, but which actually blocked his son from experiencing the love and engagement he craved. The house itself seemed to mirror John's internal state. Rooms that were once filled with music, laughter, and light now felt like empty containers. Toys sat in corners waiting to be touched while books lay unopened on shelves. Meals were functional, not shared. Bedtime routines were executed efficiently, with little conversation or connection. John felt the weight of the emptiness pressing on him at all times, a constant reminder that life had changed in ways he had never prepared for. He began to fear that the gap between him and Ethan would never be bridged, that the months of absence had created a permanent barrier that neither time nor effort could overcome. Despite the challenges, John remained determined not to give up. He began researching child development and therapy for children with paralysis, hoping to find strategies that could help Ethan regain some independence and confidence. He read articles, watched videos, and consulted specialists. Yet he quickly realized that no amount of knowledge could replace the simple, profound act of presence. Physical therapy, adaptive equipment, and educational tools were all important, but they could not replicate the warmth, attention, and connection that a child needed to feel alive, valued, and loved. As the weeks stretched into months, John's awareness of his own emotional shortcomings became sharper. He saw how his withdrawal had inadvertently compounded Ethan's struggles, making the child more cautious, more hesitant, and less willing to engage. He began to understand that being a father after such a tragedy required more than fulfilling basic duties. It required courage to face his own grief, vulnerability to connect with his son, and a willingness to risk pain for the sake of love. Every day became a lesson in patience and persistence, a reminder that healing and connection were processes, not destinations. The arrival of Mary, the new housekeeper, marked a turning point. Unlike the caregivers who had come before, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of Ethan's emotional needs. She would sit on the floor with him, engaging in play, encouraging exploration, and responding to his gestures and sounds with genuine enthusiasm. For the first time in months, John observed someone interacting with his son in a way that prioritized connection over routine. He noticed the joy on Ethan's face, the way he leaned into the play, the sparkle in his eyes that had been absent for so long. John felt a mixture of relief and awe, realizing that the presence and care of another person could illuminate what he had been too grief-stricken to see. John's evenings began to change after he observed Mary with Ethan. He felt a stirring of hope, a reminder that connection was still possible. He realized that his withdrawal had been a protective mechanism, but it also prevented him from experiencing the small joys that his son could offer. As he watched Mary laugh and guide Ethan through playful interactions, John felt a subtle but profound shift. He began to understand that the path to reconnecting with his son required him to be present, to engage without fear, and to allow himself to feel again. After months of struggling with uncertainty and fear, John made a decision he had avoided for a long time. The idea of installing cameras throughout his home came not from distrust alone, but from a desperate need to understand what happened when he wasn't there. He had already witnessed the limitations of caregivers who, despite their professionalism, failed to provide the emotional connection that Ethan needed. John wanted to know that his son was safe, that no harm would come to him, and that the small, precious moments of joy that had once defined their family were not being overlooked or neglected. It was a drastic step, and he understood the moral and ethical implications, but in that moment, he felt that the potential benefits outweighed the discomfort of surveillance. John began planning the placement of cameras with the meticulous attention to detail that had made him successful in business. He studied the layout of his apartment, identifying key areas where Ethan spent the most time, the living room where he played, the kitchen where meals were prepared, and even the small reading nook by the window that had been a favorite spot for story time with Laura. Each camera had to provide a clear view without being intrusive, capturing activity without interfering with the natural flow of the house. John researched models, read reviews, and compared features, ensuring that the cameras could provide high-quality recordings, operate discreetly, and store footage for review. To him, this was not about suspicion but about protection, a necessary measure for a child whose needs went far beyond the ordinary. Once the cameras were installed, John felt a mix of apprehension and relief. There was a strange comfort in knowing he could observe every moment, a reassurance that if anything were amiss, he could act immediately. At first, he approached the task with caution. He watched short segments of footage, making mental notes of patterns and behaviors. Ethan's routine was familiar but fragile, a delicate rhythm shaped by months of adaptation and therapy. John found himself noticing small details he had missed before, the way Ethan's fingers would twitch as he tried to grasp a toy, the subtle facial expressions when he was frustrated or curious, and the tiny bursts of joy when he managed to perform even the simplest task independently. Each observation filled John with both pride and a painful reminder of how much he had been absent. The initial days of monitoring were emotionally taxing. John would return home, sit in his study, and review hours of footage, trying to balance his need for oversight with the risk of becoming overly obsessive. He saw the caregivers go about their tasks efficiently, but he also saw gaps in attention, moments where Ethan's attempts at interaction were ignored or brushed aside. It was not negligence, but it underscored the lack of true engagement. John realized that while safety and routine were critical, what Ethan craved was much more than physical care. He needed presence, empathy, and encouragement, things that could not be scheduled or checked off a list. As John continued reviewing the recordings, he began to notice subtle changes in Ethan's behavior that he had not perceived before. The boy would sometimes glance toward the door as if expecting someone, or attempt a small movement with a toy, hoping for approval. These tiny gestures carried immense weight, revealing a need for acknowledgement and connection that had gone unmet for months. John felt a mix of guilt and determination. He knew he had to step in, to bridge the gap, and to ensure that his son's emotional and psychological needs were recognized and nurtured. The cameras, while a temporary tool, had revealed truths that he could no longer ignore. One afternoon, as John scrolled through the footage, he noticed something remarkable. Mary, the new housekeeper, was sitting on the floor with Ethan, her posture relaxed but attentive. She engaged him in play, guiding his hands over a set of pots and wooden spoons, laughing with genuine delight at his reactions. Ethan responded with bright eyes and a wide smile, a contrast to the withdrawn expressions he often wore around other caregivers. John watched, captivated, as Mary adjusted her position to be at eye level with Ethan, demonstrating a level of empathy and care that he had been unable to provide himself. Her actions were not dictated by instruction or obligation, they came from a place of understanding and heart. The discovery was both comforting and unsettling for John. On one hand, he was relieved that Ethan was experiencing moments of happiness, feeling seen and valued. On the other hand, he realized how far he had been removed from his son's daily life, how much he had relied on routines and physical care rather than emotional presence. The footage revealed the stark difference between competency and connection, and John understood that while he had tried to protect his son from harm, he had inadvertently neglected the more vital component of his well-being: love, attention, and human interaction. The cameras also gave John insights into his own behavior. Reviewing footage from earlier days, he saw himself rush through interactions, mechanically performing tasks, and missing cues that Ethan was seeking attention or comfort. He watched the way Ethan's eyes followed him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty, and he realized that the boy's trust and confidence had been eroded by months of emotional absence. It was a painful realization, but it was necessary. The recordings were not just surveillance. They were a mirror reflecting John's own failures, a tool to guide him toward becoming the father he had been incapable of being in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. John began to approach the footage with a new perspective. Instead of merely checking for safety, he focused on patterns of joy, engagement, and learning. He took notes on what activities elicited genuine laughter, what interactions seemed to build confidence, and how Mary naturally supported Ethan's growth. He realized that these moments could be replicated and that he, too, could participate in ways that were meaningful. The cameras had uncovered a blueprint for connection, a guide showing him how to meet his son's needs beyond the practical, beyond the physical. With each day, John felt a growing sense of responsibility. He could no longer be content with passive oversight. The recordings revealed opportunities, moments where he could intervene, interact, and rebuild the bond that had been strained by tragedy. He began to plan ways to join Ethan in his activities, inspired by the footage of Mary's engagement. Simple things, like sitting on the floor, playing with toys, and responding to Ethan's cues, became strategies for reconnection. He realized that proximity alone was not enough. Intentional engagement, active presence, and emotional responsiveness were essential. The cameras, once installed out of fear and necessity, had become instruments of understanding. They allowed John to witness the depth of his son's needs, the joy that could be elicited through genuine interaction, and the profound impact of empathetic care. He understood that the ultimate goal was not to monitor or control but to learn, to see what mattered, and to act on it. The recordings provided clarity, showing him the difference between being a caregiver and being a parent, a difference defined by love, attention, and presence. John's decision to use the cameras, difficult as it was, became a turning point. It transformed his approach from passive worry to active participation. He began to schedule intentional time with Ethan, guided by the insights he gained from observing Mary's interactions. He learned to listen more closely, to respond to nonverbal cues, and to appreciate the small victories. Each moment of laughter, each attempted movement, and each spark of curiosity was now seen as an opportunity to strengthen their bond. By the time John fully processed what the cameras had revealed, he had made a silent vow to change his approach entirely. The technology that had initially been a tool of precaution became a teacher, showing him the way to connect, nurture, and restore the relationship that tragedy had strained. He realized that safety, while important, was not enough. What Ethan needed most was a father willing to be present, emotionally available, and courageous enough to confront both the past and the grief that had separated them. The cameras were no longer instruments of control. They were windows into a path of healing, understanding, and hope. Mary had been working in John's household for only 2 weeks, but the impact she was beginning to have on Ethan was profound. Unlike previous caregivers who treated the boy with mechanical care, she approached him with patience, creativity, and a deep empathy that seemed almost instinctual. One afternoon, while John was tied up in meetings, Mary decided to engage Ethan in a way that transcended the typical routines of meals and exercises. She laid out a set of pots, wooden spoons, and other household objects in a semicircle on the kitchen floor, creating an improvised musical playground. Ethan's eyes lit up with curiosity and excitement, the kind of spark John hadn't seen in months, and Mary encouraged him to explore, play, and experiment without judgment or pressure. She didn't hover over him or issue instructions in a commanding tone. Instead, she positioned herself on the floor at Ethan's level, making direct eye contact and mirroring his movements. Every small achievement, striking a pot, creating a rhythm, or even simply reaching for a spoon, was met with enthusiastic praise. Mary's laughter was genuine, warm, and contagious, and for the first time since the accident, Ethan responded with full engagement, his own laughter filling the room in a way that seemed almost magical. John, watching from a discreet angle, felt a mix of astonishment and a bittersweet ache. He realized that the connection Mary was fostering was not something he had achieved, not because of lack of love, but because grief and fear had rendered him emotionally unavailable. Mary's approach went beyond mere play. She recognized the importance of presence, of being physically and emotionally aligned with Ethan's experience. When he struggled to keep a rhythm, she slowed down to match his pace. When he hesitated or seemed uncertain, she offered gentle encouragement without taking control. In every interaction, she respected his autonomy while providing support, creating a safe environment where he could express himself freely. John began to understand that this was not simply about fun. It was therapy in its purest form, emotional and psychological nourishment delivered through trust, attention, and shared joy. During these sessions, Mary also paid attention to the subtle cues that many adults would have overlooked. She noticed the way Ethan's eyebrows furrowed when he was concentrating, the small flicker of frustration when something didn't go as planned, and the radiant smile when he succeeded. She adjusted her behavior accordingly, offering a helping hand when needed, stepping back to allow independence, and always providing feedback that reinforced his confidence. Through these carefully tuned interactions, Mary was teaching Ethan not only to play but also to trust, to engage, and to rediscover a sense of agency in a world that had suddenly become challenging and unfamiliar. John observed these moments with a mixture of awe and guilt. He had installed cameras to monitor safety, but he found himself captivated by the footage of Mary's interactions. She was doing something that no one else had managed to do. She was bringing Ethan back to life, emotionally and psychologically, John realized how much he had underestimated the importance of emotional presence. Caregivers could attend to physical needs, but without engagement, without attention, without genuine warmth, a child's spirit could wither even in the absence of neglect. He recognized that Mary was not simply performing a job. She was acting out of empathy, compassion, and perhaps an innate understanding of what children needed to thrive. The transformation in Ethan was gradual but unmistakable. Over days, his posture improved, his willingness to explore expanded, and his laughter became more frequent and uninhibited. The boy began to reach for more activities, experimenting with sounds, movements, and rhythms, encouraged by Mary's consistent and patient attention. John noticed subtle changes when he interacted with Ethan afterward. The boy seemed more responsive, more confident, and even more willing to seek engagement. It became clear to John that Mary's presence was not just enhancing Ethan's immediate experience but reshaping his capacity for connection, trust, and joy. Mary also addressed the emotional aspects of recovery that had been neglected for months. She talked to Ethan about his feelings in a way that was accessible and nurturing, recognizing the trauma he had experienced. When he expressed fear or frustration, she acknowledged it rather than dismissing it, helping him process complex emotions through conversation, play, and reassurance. This approach not only allowed Ethan to feel validated and understood but also began to restore a sense of security and stability that had been lost in the aftermath of the accident. John began to see that emotional safety was as crucial as physical support, and he realized that Mary was providing both seamlessly. In addition to one-on-one activities, Mary found ways to integrate Ethan into everyday household routines in ways that promoted engagement. She allowed him to help with simple tasks, turning chores into collaborative and playful experiences. Baking cookies became a rhythm game, setting the table transformed into a matching and sorting activity, and cleaning up afterward was framed as an opportunity to celebrate teamwork and accomplishment. Through these interactions, Ethan experienced a sense of mastery and competence that he had been denied since the accident, reinforcing the idea that he could participate meaningfully in his environment despite physical limitations. John found himself reflecting on the contrast between Mary's approach and his own. He had been physically present for Ethan at times, but emotionally he had been trapped in grief, unable to respond to the boy's subtle cues or engage in meaningful interaction. Mary's actions illuminated the difference between being physically available and being truly present. It became painfully clear that love alone was not enough. It had to be accompanied by effort, attention, and a willingness to step into the child's world, to meet them where they were, both physically and emotionally. The cumulative effect of Mary's dedication was evident not only in Ethan's behavior, but also in the atmosphere of the home. Rooms that had felt heavy and constrained now seemed alive with possibility. Laughter became more frequent, interactions more fluid, and the sense of despair that had weighed on John began to lift slightly. Observing this transformation, John felt a mixture of gratitude and humility. He realized that parenting after tragedy was not about perfection or control, but about showing up, creating opportunities for connection, and embracing vulnerability as a path to healing. As the days turned into weeks, John began to experiment with his own interactions, inspired by Mary's example. He would sit on the floor with Ethan, attempting to play, guide, and engage in ways he had avoided for months. Initially awkward and self-conscious, these efforts gradually became more natural as John observed the results in Ethan's reactions. The boy responded with delight, curiosity, and trust, reinforcing John's commitment to being an emotionally present father. Mary remained a steady guide, providing encouragement and feedback, subtly coaching John to connect with his son in ways he had not considered. Through Mary's transformative influence, John gained insight into the deeper meaning of caregiving and parenting. He began to understand that nurturing a child after trauma required patience, empathy, and creativity, and that small, intentional actions could have profound effects. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of trust that Ethan offered became a testament to the power of genuine human connection. John learned that rebuilding a bond was not about grand gestures but about consistent, heartfelt engagement, about showing up fully even when it was difficult, uncomfortable, or emotionally draining. By the end of this period, the household dynamic had shifted dramatically. Ethan was more confident, joyful, and expressive. John was slowly relearning the role of fatherhood, discovering the capacity for patience, empathy, and connection that grief had once obscured. Mary had become indispensable, not merely as a caregiver but as a catalyst for healing, demonstrating through her actions what it meant to love, nurture, and engage authentically. John realized that the presence of a compassionate, emotionally intelligent adult could reshape a child's experience in ways that no amount of routine or instruction could. John had been reviewing the footage from the cameras for weeks, originally just to check that Ethan was safe. He had never anticipated that what he would see one afternoon would completely alter his perception of what it meant to care for his son. It started as a routine scroll through the recordings, the same habit he had developed since installing the cameras. He expected to see ordinary activities, meals being served, exercises followed, daily routines maintained. What he didn't expect was the image of Mary, sitting on the kitchen floor with Ethan, fully engaged and smiling, encouraging him with the kind of warmth and attention he had thought impossible to replicate. The scene on the screen was almost surreal. Mary had spread out an assortment of pots, pans, and wooden spoons across the floor, creating an impromptu orchestra for Ethan. The boy was bathed in sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, his small hands moving clumsily but eagerly to strike the pots. Ethan's eyes sparkled, and a broad grin stretched across his face for the first time in months. Mary, wearing her work uniform, lay on the floor across from him, clapping, laughing, and mimicking the rhythms he created, her gaze focused entirely on the boy. John felt his heart pound. It was a moment of pure connection, one that he had been unable to generate despite months of trying. He watched, mesmerized, as Mary continued to interact with Ethan. She wasn't hovering or instructing, she was responding. When he missed a beat, she adjusted, seamlessly integrating his errors into the rhythm, turning missteps into learning moments. When he struck a pot too hard and looked momentarily frustrated, she smiled warmly, encouraging him to try again without making him feel inadequate. John's chest tightened as he realized that this was more than play. It was therapy. It was emotional support. It was love expressed in action, unmediated by any agenda or obligation. And it was something he had not been able to provide since Laura's accident. For months, John had watched caregivers come and go, seeing the routines carried out efficiently, but emotionally detached. Now, through the lens of the camera, he was seeing a different kind of engagement entirely. He had been focused on safety and competence, but Mary's interactions revealed what he had been missing: presence. She met Ethan at his level, physically and emotionally, treating him as a person first, a patient second. Every gesture, every laugh, every word was measured not by protocol, but by empathy. John realized that no manual or training could teach someone this kind of understanding. It was instinctual, a reflection of a genuine heart and a sharp awareness of what Ethan needed. John's thoughts raced as he continued to watch. He had worried for months about hiring the wrong person, about leaving Ethan alone with someone who might not understand him. Yet here was Mary, not just meeting expectations but exceeding them in ways that seemed effortless. She had managed in 2 weeks what John had been struggling to do for months: bring joy, engagement, and emotional connection back into Ethan's life. He felt a mix of relief, admiration, and guilt. He was relieved that Ethan was experiencing happiness. He admired Mary's dedication and intuition. He felt guilty that he had been so absent, and that months had gone by without him realizing the depth of Ethan's emotional needs. Watching the interaction unfold, John noticed the little things that made the scene so transformative. Mary adjusted her posture to remain at Ethan's eye level, ensuring that he never felt small or diminished. She used verbal encouragement and physical cues in a way that respected his abilities while gently stretching his boundaries. She celebrated small successes with enthusiasm, making Ethan feel accomplished and capable. The boy's response was immediate. He smiled more, reached further, and laughed freely. Each sound a note of triumph in a melody that John had almost forgotten existed. John leaned closer to the screen, his eyes tracing the subtle exchanges between them. When Ethan hesitated, Mary leaned in slightly, offering a hand or a nudge, never overbearing but always supportive. When he experimented with a rhythm, she clapped along, matching his pace, creating a shared experience that felt like a dance. John's mind raced with a mixture of disbelief and awe. He realized that this level of engagement, this understanding, could not be replicated by routine or schedule. It required attentiveness, emotional intelligence, and the courage to show care in ways that were not dictated by a contract or job description. The more John watched, the more he understood the depth of Ethan's need for connection. The boy's physical condition was only part of the challenge. The emotional aftermath of losing his mother had left him vulnerable, unsure, and craving attention that had been sporadic at best. Mary's presence filled that gap. She was not just keeping him occupied. She was validating his feelings, encouraging his independence, and showing him through action that he mattered. Each gesture was deliberate, intentional, and filled with warmth. John began to see that these small, consistent acts could have a transformative impact, and that Mary was creating a foundation for trust, confidence, and emotional resilience. John's own emotions became increasingly complex as he continued to observe. There was admiration for Mary, yes, but also a profound sense of self-reflection. He saw in the footage the stark contrast between what Ethan received from her and what he had been able to provide himself. He realized that grief had kept him distant, that his own fear and sorrow had prevented him from being present, from responding to cues, and from participating fully in his son's world. Watching the footage was painful but necessary. It forced him to confront the truth. Care and love were not simply about providing sustenance or routines. They were about presence, attention, and engagement. As the scene unfolded, John also began to notice Ethan's growing confidence. The boy was experimenting with rhythm and movement, adjusting his actions based on Mary's reactions, and even initiating new patterns of play. There was a spark in his eyes, a lightness in his expression, that had been absent for months. John felt a mixture of relief and determination. He realized that he could not remain a passive observer. The footage had shown him what was possible, and now it was his turn to act. He had to step into Ethan's world, to be present, and to learn from Mary's example. By the end of the recording, John was emotionally exhausted but inspired. He understood that Mary had done more than fulfill her duties. She had revealed a path for him to reconnect with his son. She had demonstrated how presence, empathy, and patience could restore joy, trust, and engagement. John made a silent commitment to change. He would not wait for perfection, nor would he attempt to erase months of absence in a single day. Instead, he would start small, taking cues from Mary, and gradually rebuild the bond that had been fractured by tragedy. In the days that followed, John began experimenting with what he had observed. He would join Ethan in play, mimicking Mary's attentiveness and responsiveness. Initially awkward, his efforts became more natural as he learned to read Ethan's cues, match his energy, and engage in ways that felt authentic. Each laugh, each smile, each small achievement became a stepping stone toward rebuilding trust and connection. John realized that the cameras, once tools for oversight and protection, had become instruments of understanding and growth. They had shown him not just that Ethan was safe, but that love, engagement, and presence were essential to his son's recovery and happiness. Through this experience, John also gained a deeper appreciation for Mary's role in their household. She had become more than a housekeeper. She was a guide, a mentor, and a catalyst for healing. Her presence illuminated what John had been unable to provide on his own, and showed him the power of empathy and engagement in nurturing a child. For the first time in months, John felt a flicker of hope that he could reconnect with Ethan, hope that joy could return, and hope that they could begin to rebuild their family despite the tragedy that had befallen them. John sat back in his office chair, staring at the blank wall, though his mind was anything but empty. The footage he had watched earlier that day replayed vividly in his memory, Mary laughing with Ethan, encouraging him to reach for the pots, adjusting her position to meet him at eye level, and celebrating every tiny success with genuine enthusiasm. It was so different from anything he had seen in the months following Laura's accident. Every caregiver he had hired before had approached Ethan's care as a checklist of duties: feeding, cleaning, administering therapy, maintaining routines, but none had connected with him emotionally. John had assumed that expertise and experience were enough, but now he saw clearly that they were only part of the equation. Love, presence, and empathy were what truly mattered. He reflected on the past 6 months with a mixture of regret and understanding. Each caregiver had their own strengths, but none had managed to reach Ethan's heart. Some were overly cautious, following instructions to the letter, which left little room for engagement or spontaneity. Others were brisk and efficient, accomplishing tasks quickly but with little warmth. They treated Ethan with a mixture of professional distance and pity, seeing his paralysis as the defining feature of who he was. John realized that he had been complicit in this approach by failing to set expectations that went beyond practical care. He had been so focused on safety and routine that he had overlooked the emotional dimension entirely. The contrast with Mary was stark and undeniable. In her, John saw a natural understanding of what Ethan needed, someone willing to meet him where he was, to acknowledge his emotions, and to provide attention without judgment. Mary didn't pity Ethan, nor did she treat him as fragile or incapable. Instead, she treated him as a person with strengths, limitations, and a right to joy. She engaged him in play, encouraged his curiosity, and celebrated his successes with the kind of sincerity that could only come from genuine care. Watching her, John felt both admiration and a painful awareness of his own failures. He had been physically present for his son, but emotionally he had been absent, withdrawn into his grief and fear. John began to examine his own behavior with a critical eye. He remembered moments when he had tried to play with Ethan, but had been too tense or distracted. The child's tentative smiles met with awkward laughter or quick attention. He recalled leaving therapy exercises incomplete, rushing through reading sessions, and responding to questions with clipped answers. Each memory carried with it a pang of guilt. He realized that his withdrawal had not been intentional neglect, but a defense mechanism, a way to shield himself from the raw emotions that surfaced whenever he confronted the accident and its consequences. Yet, he could no longer ignore the impact of that absence. Ethan had endured not only the trauma of losing his mother and becoming paralyzed, but also the emotional distance of the parent he needed most. The more John reflected, the clearer the lesson became. Caregiving was not merely about performing tasks. It was about engagement, emotional availability, and empathy. He recognized that Mary's success with Ethan did not come from formal training alone, but from her ability to perceive his needs and respond with patience and understanding. Her actions reminded John that connection required presence, that joy and trust were nurtured through attention and care rather than schedules and checklists. He saw how small moments, a smile, a shared laugh, a gentle touch could bridge the gap between trauma and healing in ways that no amount of medical intervention could replicate. John's awareness of his own emotional failings deepened as he considered the implications. He realized that his absence had not only affected Ethan, but had also kept him from experiencing the fullness of fatherhood. He had been physically there, but emotionally distant, navigating grief in isolation while expecting his son to adapt without guidance or reassurance. The recordings of Mary interacting with Ethan served as a mirror, reflecting both what he had been missing and what was possible if he changed his approach. The contrast was painful, yet it offered a roadmap for how he could begin to repair the relationship. He began to make mental notes, studying Mary's methods and considering how he could emulate them. She met Ethan at his level, both physically and emotionally. She allowed him to lead, making mistakes along the way without criticism, and celebrated every effort, no matter how small. She listened to him, responded to his cues, and provided gentle encouragement, creating a safe space for exploration and growth. John realized that these were the principles he needed to adopt in his interactions with Ethan: presence, patience, encouragement, and respect for the child's autonomy. John also thought about the emotional resilience that Mary demonstrated. She had been aware of Ethan's limitations and the trauma he had experienced, yet she approached him with optimism and creativity, finding ways to engage him meaningfully. She treated challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles and maintained a balance between support and independence. John recognized that he had been too consumed by his own grief to offer this perspective, and that by learning from Mary, he could provide the emotional scaffolding Ethan needed to thrive despite his circumstances. As John continued reflecting, he realized that this awareness extended beyond his son. He began to understand the importance of self-compassion and healing in the process of caregiving. His withdrawal had been protective, but it had come at a cost. By confronting his own emotions, acknowledging his failings, and learning to act with intention, he could begin to break the cycle of distance and absence. The recordings of Mary at work had opened his eyes not only to what Ethan needed, but also to what he needed: guidance, practice, and courage to be emotionally present despite the pain he carried. John's reflections turned to practical considerations. He understood that he could no longer rely on others to provide the emotional connection that was vital for Ethan. He would need to actively participate, integrating the lessons he had observed into daily life. Playtime meals, therapy exercises, and reading sessions were no longer simply tasks to complete, they were opportunities to build trust, to celebrate achievement, and to reconnect. He began planning how he would join Ethan on the floor, mirror his movements, and provide encouragement in the same way Mary did. Understanding that it would be awkward at first, but essential for their relationship. The contrast with previous caregivers also highlighted the value of consistent, intentional presence. John realized that short visits or sporadic engagement were insufficient. What Ethan needed was a parent willing to commit time and energy, someone who would be attentive even when tired or emotionally drained. Mary's actions demonstrated that this level of care could create a profound impact, and John resolved to adopt a similar approach, recognizing that rebuilding trust and emotional connection would require sustained effort and consistency. John's reflections ultimately led to a profound emotional awakening. He recognized the depth of his son's needs, the shortcomings of his own prior approach, and the potential for transformation through presence and engagement. The footage of Mary had revealed the missing piece in his parenting, the combination of attention, empathy, and joy that could bring life back into Ethan's world. He felt both a renewed sense of responsibility and a cautious optimism, knowing that while the journey would be challenging, the path forward was now clearer. By the end of the day, John made a personal commitment. He would no longer be a passive observer in his son's life, content to watch from afar while the emotional gap persisted. He would actively engage, learn from Mary's example, and apply what he had observed in ways that honored Ethan's needs. He understood that the journey of reconnecting with his son would be long and demanding, but he was ready to take the first steps, armed with awareness, intention, and a newfound appreciation for the power of genuine presence. John finally leaned back, exhausted but determined. He had witnessed the stark contrast between professional competence and emotional engagement, and it had transformed his perspective. He knew that to be the father Ethan needed, he would have to show up fully, not just as a provider, but as an active, attentive, and compassionate presence in his son's life. For the first time in months, John felt hope that he could rebuild the bond with Ethan, and with it, begin to heal the wounds that had weighed so heavily on them both. John spent the following days in a state of restless reflection. Each morning, he woke with a heavy heart, thinking about Ethan's small hands and the eyes that had once looked at him with trust and expectation. The footage he had watched of Mary playing with his son replayed in his mind constantly. Every laugh, every tiny achievement, and every moment of attention made him painfully aware of what he had been missing. He realized that his absence over the past 6 months had not only deprived Ethan of emotional support, but had also prevented him from experiencing the joys of fatherhood, the small victories and intimate moments that define a parent-child relationship. He found himself questioning everything he had done since the accident. He had thought he was protecting himself and his son by keeping an emotional distance, by immersing himself in work, and by delegating caregiving to others. But now, watching Ethan interact with Mary, John understood that his strategies had failed in ways he could not have anticipated. He had focused on safety and routines, assuming that as long as Ethan was fed, cleaned, and exercised, he was fulfilling his responsibilities. Yet he realized that care without presence was hollow. Safety alone could not compensate for the absence of connection, laughter, and affirmation. Guilt weighed heavily on him. John remembered countless nights when he had returned home exhausted, barely noticing Ethan's attempts to engage him. The boy would reach for a toy or smile tentatively, and John, lost in his own grief and fatigue, would respond mechanically or withdraw altogether. Every memory now felt like a missed opportunity, every lapse a failure to be the father Ethan needed. The awareness was painful, almost unbearable, but it also ignited something deep within him, a recognition that change was necessary and urgent. John's mind often replayed the same question: how had he allowed months to pass without connecting with his son in meaningful ways? He remembered the caregivers before Mary, competent but distant, and the stark contrast with the warmth and engagement she displayed. It was a revelation, one that shook him to his core. He realized that parenting after trauma was not about perfection, schedules, or routines. It was about showing up, being present, and allowing oneself to feel, even when the feelings were painful. He understood that grief could not be a barrier to love, it had to coexist with it. And only then could he reconnect with Ethan authentically. Each day, John's internal struggle manifested in a tug of war between fear and determination. Fear whispered that he was too late, that Ethan had already adapted to life without him, and that the bond between father and son might be irreparably damaged. Determination, however, urged him to act, to reclaim his role in Ethan's life, and to rebuild the connection that had been fractured. John realized that fear would always be present, that the memories of the accident and the loss of Laura would never fully disappear. But he also understood that he could not let fear dictate his actions. He needed to be brave for his son, to embrace vulnerability, and to commit fully to the process of reconnecting. The turning point came when John consciously decided to participate in the same activities he had observed Mary doing with Ethan. He remembered her positioning herself on the floor, matching Ethan's movements, responding to every attempt, celebrating every success. John realized that these actions, simple as they seemed, were profoundly transformative. They created moments of connection, trust, and joy that were crucial to Ethan's development and emotional well-being. He knew that he had to replicate this presence, not just occasionally but consistently, making it an integral part of his daily life with his son. John began planning how to engage with Ethan more intentionally. He thought about how he would approach play, meals, therapy sessions, and reading time. Each activity was an opportunity to rebuild trust, to demonstrate attention, and to participate fully in Ethan's world. He understood that he would likely feel awkward at first, that his movements might be clumsy and his responses hesitant. But he also knew that consistency and genuine effort were more important than perfection. The goal was not flawless execution, it was being present, engaged, and emotionally available. Alongside these practical considerations, John also reflected on his own emotional needs. He realized that he could not fully connect with Ethan if he remained trapped in grief, fear, and guilt. The accident had left scars on both their lives, and he recognized that healing was necessary for both father and son. John decided to seek therapy, to confront the pain he had been avoiding, and to learn strategies for processing grief while remaining emotionally accessible to Ethan. It was a step that required courage, humility, and self-awareness, but he understood that it was essential to becoming the father his son deserved. John's determination was fueled not only by guilt or obligation but by love. He remembered Ethan's small smile during the footage, the sparkle in his eyes, and the laughter that had been absent for months. That joy was a reminder of what was possible, a glimpse of the potential for their relationship to flourish despite tragedy. John understood that reconnecting with his son was not about erasing the past, but about creating new moments, building trust, and nurturing a sense of security and love that could coexist with the memories of loss. Every day, John practiced presence in small ways. He would kneel beside Ethan during playtime, matching his energy and responding to his cues. He would read aloud, exaggerating voices and expressions to make the stories come alive. He joined in therapy exercises, celebrating every tiny improvement with warmth and encouragement. Slowly, Ethan began to respond. His expressions brightened, his movements became more confident, and his laughter returned with increasing frequency. John felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that these small, consistent efforts were beginning to repair the emotional bond that had been strained for so long. John's internal struggle also included confronting his own limitations. He knew that he could not undo the past, that the months of absence could not be erased. But he learned to accept imperfection and to focus on what he could do in the present. Each successful interaction, each moment of shared joy, became a building block for trust and connection. John recognized that parenting was an ongoing process, a series of choices and actions that collectively shaped a child's experience and emotional growth. He resolved to continue making choices that prioritized presence, engagement, and empathy. By the end of the first few weeks of this renewed effort, John could feel a subtle but profound change. Ethan's energy and responsiveness had increased, and their interactions were marked by more laughter, curiosity, and mutual enjoyment. John's heart, once heavy with guilt and grief, began to lighten as he experienced the rewards of emotional presence. He realized that his determination to reconnect was not a one-time effort, but a lifelong commitment. He had glimpsed the transformative power of genuine engagement, and he was determined to integrate it into every aspect of his relationship with Ethan. John also reflected on Mary's role in this transformation. Her example had shown him that connection, care, and empathy were active choices, not passive qualities. She had demonstrated how to meet Ethan where he was, respond to his needs, and celebrate his achievements in ways that fostered confidence and joy. John understood that he needed to emulate these principles, not to replace Mary, but to become the father his son required. Her presence had illuminated the path forward, and now it was his responsibility to walk it, step by step, with courage, patience, and love. By the end of each day, John felt exhausted but fulfilled. He had confronted his fears, engaged emotionally with his son, and taken tangible steps toward rebuilding their relationship. The journey was far from complete, and he knew challenges would continue to arise. Yet, he felt a growing sense of hope and determination. For the first time since Laura's accident, he believed that they could move forward together, that joy, trust, and connection could return, and that he could be the father Ethan needed him to be. John had grown accustomed to observing Mary's interactions with Ethan through the cameras. Over the weeks, he had watched her patience, her attentiveness, and the gentle ways in which she nurtured his son's confidence. He had begun to learn from her example, slowly attempting to mirror her approach. But he still struggled to fully bridge the emotional gap that had formed between him and Ethan. John believed he was progressing, yet he did not realize that Mary had been silently evaluating him as well. One evening, as he returned from the office earlier than usual, he found her waiting for him in the living room, her posture firm but calm, her expression carrying a seriousness that immediately caught his attention. Mary's gaze was direct, not accusatory but piercing in its clarity. "John," she began, her voice steady yet gentle, "I need to talk to you about something important. I've been taking care of Ethan for a few weeks now, and I've seen something that I think you need to hear." John felt a flutter of apprehension. He had anticipated feedback on routines or instructions, but the gravity in Mary's tone suggested that this conversation would be different. She continued, explaining how she had observed the dynamics between father and son, noting that while he was present physically, he often held back emotionally, and Ethan sensed it. She described the subtle cues Ethan displayed, the hesitant reaches for attention, the moments when he tried to engage and was met with distraction or withdrawal, and how these patterns could shape his sense of security and self-worth. John listened intently, his heart tightening with each word. He had known, intellectually, that his grief had created a barrier. But hearing it articulated so clearly by someone he trusted brought a new depth to his understanding. Mary's words were firm yet compassionate, highlighting not just the problems, but also the potential for change. She reminded him that Ethan needed him to show up fully, not merely in presence but in engagement, emotion, and attention. She emphasized that love without action, without consistent, active participation was insufficient to help his son thrive. John felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, but he also recognized the gift in Mary's honesty. Mary went on to illustrate her observations with concrete examples. She spoke about the times she had witnessed Ethan attempt to initiate play or conversation, only to be met with a distracted glance or a brief, mechanical response from John. She mentioned the small victories Ethan had achieved with her guidance, noting how these moments could be amplified if John became more actively involved. Mary emphasized that Ethan's confidence and emotional well-being were closely tied to his father's presence, and that while she could provide temporary support, the long-term growth and happiness of the child required John's authentic engagement. John felt a mixture of guilt, relief, and determination. Guilt, because he had unintentionally allowed months to pass without truly connecting. Relief, because Mary's honesty provided clarity and direction, and determination, because he now understood exactly what steps he needed to take. He realized that he could no longer rely solely on observation or fear of inadequacy. The responsibility to nurture, guide, and connect with his son rested squarely on his shoulders, and he was ready to embrace it fully. The conversation with Mary marked a turning point. John reflected on the contrast between her approach and his own. While he had been cautious, fearful of doing something wrong or causing harm, Mary had approached Ethan with courage, empathy, and creativity. She had created an environment where Ethan felt safe to explore, make mistakes, and learn. She had modeled the kind of presence and engagement that John now recognized as essential, demonstrating that emotional connection was not something passive but an active, ongoing effort. Her confrontation was not an accusation, it was guidance, a blueprint for how he could become the father his son needed. Over the following days, John took Mary's words to heart, experimenting with different ways to engage with Ethan. He joined him on the floor during play, mirrored his actions, and responded to his cues with enthusiasm. He began to participate in daily routines not just as a caregiver, but as a partner in exploration and learning. Each small interaction was a deliberate choice to be present, emotionally available, and attentive. John quickly realized that this intentionality transformed the quality of their interactions, allowing Ethan to respond with greater confidence, joy, and trust. Mary continued to observe, offering subtle guidance and support. She did not take over but instead provided feedback, highlighting successes and gently suggesting adjustments where John could improve. This partnership allowed John to grow in his role as a father, learning not through criticism, but through practical demonstration and reflection. He began to see that parenting, especially in the wake of trauma, required courage, patience, and a willingness to be vulnerable. Each interaction with Ethan became a lesson in empathy, attentiveness, and emotional intelligence. Skills that John had not fully realized were necessary until that moment. John also confronted the emotional barriers within himself. He acknowledged the lingering grief over Laura's death and the fear of inadequacy that had kept him distant. He understood that to be present for Ethan, he needed to process these feelings rather than let them control his behavior. Therapy became a valuable resource, providing strategies for managing grief, anxiety, and guilt while remaining emotionally accessible. John began to integrate these insights into his daily interactions, recognizing that his growth as a father was inseparable from his growth as an individual. The lessons Mary imparted extended beyond direct engagement with Ethan. She emphasized the importance of consistency, explaining that a child's sense of security is reinforced not by occasional moments of attention, but by regular, predictable engagement. John began to structure his time intentionally, ensuring that he was fully present during play meals, therapy sessions, and bedtime routines. He discovered that even small gestures, a shared laugh, a high five, or attentive listening could strengthen their bond and reinforce Ethan's confidence and sense of worth. As John implemented these lessons, he noticed immediate changes in Ethan. The boy became more expressive, more willing to take initiative, and more confident in his abilities. Each successful interaction reinforced John's belief that he could indeed rebuild the relationship that had been strained by grief and absence. The combination of Mary's guidance, his own conscious effort, and a renewed understanding of presence and engagement began to transform their household, creating an atmosphere of warmth, trust, and hope. Reflecting on Mary's confrontation, John realized that her intervention had been a gift. Without her courage to speak honestly, he might have continued in his passive, fearful approach, delaying the emotional growth of both himself and Ethan. Her words had provided clarity, motivation, and direction, showing him the path forward and giving him the tools to engage effectively. John understood that being a present, attentive father required intentionality, emotional awareness, and consistent effort, but it was within his power to achieve. By the end of that week, John felt a profound shift. He no longer viewed parenting as a series of obligations or tasks but as an active, dynamic engagement with his son. Each interaction was an opportunity to teach, support, and nurture, but also to receive love, joy, and connection in return. Mary's confrontation had catalyzed this transformation, opening his eyes to the ways in which emotional presence could repair and strengthen bonds. John felt a renewed sense of purpose, confidence, and determination, ready to face the challenges of parenthood with courage and commitment. In the weeks that followed, John continued to integrate Mary's guidance into every aspect of their daily life. He observed more closely, engaged more intentionally, and reflected continuously on his progress. Ethan responded with increasing joy, curiosity, and trust, reinforcing the lessons he had learned and inspiring him to continue growing. Mary's intervention had sparked a transformation, not just in John's behavior, but in his understanding of fatherhood itself, illustrating that genuine connection, emotional availability, and courage could overcome the barriers created by grief, fear, and absence. John sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, watching his son fidget with the blanket and adjust his position in the wheelchair. For months, he had been distant, unsure how to express feelings, and afraid that any attempt at emotional connection might overwhelm them both. But now, after observing Mary and reflecting on his own behavior, John understood that withholding emotion had done more harm than good. He realized that acknowledging mistakes was not a sign of weakness, but a necessary step toward healing and building trust. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, choosing his words carefully yet sincerely. "Ethan," he said softly, "I know I haven't been here the way I should have been. I've made mistakes, and I've let my sadness get in the way of being your dad." Ethan's wide eyes met John's, a mixture of curiosity and tentative hope. The boy had sensed the distance, the coldness in John's routines, and now, hearing these words, there was a flicker of understanding. John continued, explaining how Laura's accident had left him feeling broken and unsure how to act, how fear and grief had created walls between them, and how much he regretted not being present. Each word was difficult to say, each sentence a confrontation with months of avoidance. Yet, the act of speaking these truths aloud felt liberating, a release of the burden he had carried alone for too long. John emphasized that his mistakes had not been intentional. He had tried to cope with loss and protect both himself and Ethan, but in doing so, he had inadvertently withdrawn from the relationship that mattered most. He recounted specific examples: meals skipped, exercises rushed, moments when he had turned away instead of leaning in, and expressed his desire to change. "I want to be here for you," he said, voice steady but emotional, "not just watching, not just helping, but really being with you, every day." Ethan's small fingers reached toward John's hand, a tentative gesture that spoke volumes. It was a sign of trust, an acknowledgement that John's words were being received and that healing could begin. The process of opening up emotionally was gradual. John did not expect immediate results, nor did he demand perfection from himself. He knew that rebuilding trust required consistency, patience, and visible effort over time. He started by spending more time at Ethan's level, sitting on the floor during play, responding to questions fully, and allowing the boy to express emotions freely. He discovered that simple acknowledgments, nodding, smiling, or echoing Ethan's words had a profound effect on the boy's confidence and willingness to engage. Each positive reaction reinforced John's determination to maintain an emotionally present approach. John also explored new ways to communicate his feelings. He shared memories of Laura, describing her warmth and the way she had nurtured both of them, allowing Ethan to express emotions connected to their loss without fear of judgment. John talked about his own grief, using language that a child could understand, helping Ethan see that sadness was a normal response, but that love and connection were still possible. This openness created a bridge between them, allowing emotions to flow naturally and fostering a sense of mutual understanding. The acknowledgement of mistakes extended beyond words. John began integrating behaviors that reflected his commitment to change. He participated fully in therapy exercises, providing encouragement and celebrating each small improvement. He engaged in creative play, mirroring Ethan's ideas and exploring new games and activities. These actions demonstrated to Ethan that his father was not just apologizing but actively participating in rebuilding the emotional bond. Over time, the boy's responses became more confident, his laughter more frequent, and his willingness to initiate interactions with John increased. John also realized that opening up emotionally required addressing his own vulnerabilities. He sought therapy to process grief and guilt, learning strategies for managing emotions without letting them interfere with his parenting. He explored mindfulness, reflection, and active listening techniques, using these skills to create a calmer, more responsive presence with Ethan. By acknowledging his own challenges and working through them, John modeled resilience and emotional intelligence, showing his son that facing difficulties openly and honestly was a source of strength, not weakness. Mary's role remained important during this transition. She continued to offer guidance, pointing out subtle opportunities for connection and praising progress. She encouraged John to participate in activities that aligned with Ethan's interests, suggesting ways to make interactions engaging and meaningful. Mary's support helped John translate acknowledgement of mistakes into actionable steps, reinforcing that growth required both reflection and practice. Her presence acted as both a guide and a buffer, allowing John to experiment, learn, and strengthen his emotional skills in a safe and supportive environment. The effect of John's openness became evident in the household atmosphere. Ethan began expressing emotions more freely, asking questions, sharing ideas, and laughing without hesitation. The trust that had been eroded by months of distance was slowly restored, and the home began to feel warmer, more inviting, and more alive. John felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he witnessed the impact of his efforts, understanding that acknowledgement, honesty, and consistent emotional presence were foundational to a healthy father-son relationship. John also reflected on the importance of accountability. By acknowledging his mistakes openly and demonstrating a commitment to change, he reinforced to Ethan the value of honesty and responsibility. He realized that emotional growth required recognition of past failures, a willingness to correct them, and continuous effort to improve. This approach not only strengthened their bond, but also provided Ethan with a model for managing challenges and cultivating trust in relationships. As weeks turned into months, John's emotional openness became habitual. He no longer avoided difficult conversations or shy away from expressing feelings. He allowed himself to laugh, cry, and celebrate alongside Ethan, creating a dynamic and emotionally rich environment. Ethan responded by becoming more engaged, confident, and expressive. The mutual exchange of emotions created a feedback loop that reinforced connection and trust, gradually healing the emotional distance that had formed in the aftermath of tragedy. John's acknowledgement of mistakes and emotional growth also affected other aspects of family life. He became more attentive to household routines, integrating meaningful interactions into everyday tasks. Meals became opportunities for conversation and laughter. Therapy exercises were approached as collaborative challenges, and bedtime was filled with storytelling and reflection. By embedding emotional engagement into daily life, John ensured that presence and connection were consistent, reinforcing Ethan's sense of security and belonging. Ultimately, John realized that acknowledging mistakes was not a single act but a continuous process. Each day presented opportunities to listen, respond, and engage meaningfully. By embracing vulnerability and emotional honesty, he was able to repair and strengthen the relationship with his son, creating a foundation for trust, joy, and mutual understanding. The journey was ongoing, but the commitment to presence and empathy had transformed their lives, illustrating the profound impact of love expressed through acknowledgement, action, and emotional connection. John had spent weeks observing Mary's interactions with Ethan and reflecting on his own shortcomings. The next step, he realized, was to translate his awareness into action. He needed to learn how to connect with his son not just emotionally, but through practical, everyday activities that could foster trust, joy, and engagement. The first morning he dedicated entirely to this purpose. He set aside work obligations and approached Ethan with a determination that felt almost foreign. Instead of rushing through routines or viewing tasks as obligations, he envisioned each activity as an opportunity to bond, to participate fully, and to make his son feel valued. He started small. Breakfast became a shared event rather than a quick meal before school or therapy. John asked Ethan about his favorite foods, encouraged him to help stir ingredients, and celebrated small contributions. Each cracked egg or carefully measured spoonful of cereal was met with encouragement. Ethan's eyes lit up as he realized that his actions mattered and that his father was genuinely interested in his input. John found that these small moments, once taken for granted, held immense potential for building connection. The simple act of preparing a meal together became a platform for interaction, laughter, and mutual learning. Playtime followed breakfast. John had learned from Mary that guided play was crucial for Ethan's development and emotional growth. He carefully selected toys that allowed Ethan to explore, experiment, and express himself, while also providing opportunities for shared interaction. Building blocks became a collaborative exercise in problem solving. Each tower they constructed together was punctuated by praise, encouragement, and laughter. John focused on being present, observing Ethan's cues, and responding intuitively to his attempts at communication. He realized that successful engagement depended less on elaborate games and more on active participation, patience, and responsiveness. John also incorporated music into their activities, inspired by Mary's improvisational sessions. He retrieved pots, pans, and wooden spoons and created a small rhythm game, allowing Ethan to lead the tempo while he mirrored and reinforced the beat. Each attempt, whether precise or clumsy, was celebrated, turning errors into opportunities for shared amusement and learning. Ethan began to experiment more boldly, initiating new rhythms and patterns, confident that his father would respond with encouragement rather than correction. John felt a growing sense of accomplishment. He was beginning to witness the tangible effects of presence and guided play on his son's confidence and joy. Throughout the day, John made conscious choices to maintain eye contact, match energy levels, and validate Ethan's efforts. When Ethan grew frustrated with a task, John reframed it as a learning opportunity, offering strategies while affirming his son's competence. He encouraged verbal expression, asking Ethan to describe what he was doing, how it felt, and what he wanted to try next. This verbal engagement not only improved communication skills but also strengthened the emotional bond between father and son. John discovered that guiding Ethan through activities while allowing autonomy was a delicate balance, requiring observation, patience, and adaptability. John also paid attention to the environment. He arranged spaces to be inviting, accessible, and stimulating. Cushions on the floor created comfortable seating for joint play, small tables were set for arts and crafts, and baskets of toys and materials were organized to encourage exploration. John realized that physical arrangement mattered almost as much as his behavior. By creating spaces conducive to shared engagement, he facilitated interaction while empowering Ethan to make choices, explore, and express himself. In addition to structured activities, John began incorporating spontaneous moments of play and creativity into the day. They would chase a ball across the living room, dance to music, or build imaginary worlds with toys. These moments allowed Ethan to initiate interactions, teaching John to follow his lead rather than dictate the pace. John noticed that when he allowed Ethan to take the initiative, the boy became more confident and expressive. The reciprocal nature of these interactions deepened their connection and reinforced the lesson that true engagement requires flexibility, attentiveness, and respect for the child's perspective. Therapy exercises also became an opportunity for guided connection. John participated actively, offering encouragement, celebrating small successes, and providing gentle support. He mirrored Mary's approach, responding to Ethan's needs while allowing him to attempt challenges independently. The sessions were no longer mechanical routines. They were interactive experiences that combined physical therapy with emotional support, fostering a sense of accomplishment and reinforcing trust. John realized that participation, rather than observation, was the key to meaningful engagement, and that his active involvement could significantly enhance both progress and confidence. Reading sessions became another platform for bonding. John adopted expressive storytelling, using voices, gestures, and eye contact to bring stories to life. He encouraged Ethan to ask questions, make predictions, and comment on illustrations, turning passive reading into an interactive, shared experience. Each story provided opportunities for conversation, laughter, and emotional connection, reinforcing John's commitment to be fully present. The boy began to anticipate these moments eagerly, demonstrating the powerful effect of consistent, guided engagement on attention, curiosity, and joy. John's reflections during these activities reinforced his understanding of the principles Mary had demonstrated. Engagement required more than attention to it required intentionality, responsiveness, and the courage to participate wholeheartedly. John realized that guided play and shared activities were tools not only for entertainment or skill development, but also for emotional connection, trust building, and confidence reinforcement. Each interaction, whether through play, music, reading, or therapy, contributed to the growing bond between father and son. By the end of the first week of fully implementing guided play and shared activities, John began to notice measurable changes. Ethan was more animated, curious, and confident. He initiated more interactions, experimented with new ideas, and expressed emotions more freely. John felt a profound sense of accomplishment, recognizing that his active engagement and dedication were reshaping their relationship. The dynamic in the household shifted from routine maintenance to shared experience, from observation to participation, and from distance to connection. John's commitment extended beyond scheduled activities. He learned to seize spontaneous moments throughout the day, encouraging Ethan to describe his observations during a walk. inviting him to help with small chores and using everyday experiences as opportunities for shared learning and play. These unscripted moments reinforced trust, adaptability, and responsiveness, demonstrating that connection is continuous and woven into daily life rather than confined to structured sessions. As weeks passed, John became increasingly confident in his ability to guide and engage Ethan effectively. He no longer relied solely on observation or imitation, but began to develop his own style of interaction, integrating principles learned from Mary with his personal understanding of his son. This balance allowed for authenticity and flexibility, enabling John to respond naturally to Ethan's evolving needs. He realized that parenthood was not about perfection but about presence, adaptability, and a willingness to engage consistently and wholeheartedly. The cumulative effect of guided play and shared activities became evident in both emotional and physical progress. Ethan's confidence increased, his communication skills improved, and his physical abilities advanced through exercises approached with enthusiasm and support. More importantly, the emotional bond between father and son strengthened, creating a foundation of trust, joy, and mutual understanding. John understood that this progress was the result of intentional, sustained effort, and that the lessons learned through guided engagement would continue to shape their relationship for years to come. John had reached a pivotal point in his journey as a father. The lessons he had learned from observing Mary and engaging with Ethan through guided play and shared activities had transformed his perspective, but he understood that his own emotional growth was equally crucial. The grief he carried from losing Laura, coupled with the months of emotional distance, had created barriers that could not be addressed by effort alone. He realized that to be fully present for Ethan, he needed to confront his own emotions, process his pain, and develop the tools to engage consistently and meaningfully. Therapy became the natural next step in this process. Sitting in the therapist's office for the first time, John felt a mix of apprehension and hope. He was used to control and precision in business, but here he was confronted with uncertainty, vulnerability, and introspection. The therapist guided him to explore his grief, his fears, and the guilt that had driven him into emotional withdrawal. Through each session, John learned to articulate the complex mix of emotions he had been carrying. Discovering that naming and acknowledging them was the first step toward transformation. He realized that suppressing pain had not protected him or Ethan, it had only deepened the emotional gap between them. Therapy sessions taught John to recognize patterns in his behavior. He saw how avoidance, fear of failure, and unresolved grief had shaped his interactions with Ethan. He understood that these patterns were not a reflection of his love for his son, but rather a response to trauma. By identifying these tendencies, John was able to consciously choose different behaviors. He began experimenting with emotional openness, allowing himself to express feelings of joy, frustration, and pride in front of Ethan. The process was gradual and at times uncomfortable, but each session reinforced that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when John began to connect his past with his present. He reflected on the moments he had shared with Laura, the way she had nurtured both of them, and the lessons she had imparted about empathy, patience, and presence. Therapy allowed him to see that he could honor her memory not only through reflection, but also through action by bringing those values into his daily interactions with Ethan. Each play session, each shared meal, each therapy exercise became a living tribute to the lessons of love and care that Laura had embodied. John also learned strategies for managing stress and emotional overwhelm. Parenting a child with special needs required constant attention, patience, and energy, and he recognized that he could not sustain his presence without taking care of his own mental health. Mindfulness exercises, guided breathing, and reflective journaling became part of his routine, helping him remain calm, centered, and attentive. He discovered that by regulating his own emotions, he could respond to Ethan with greater patience and empathy, transforming moments of frustration into opportunities for connection and learning. Therapy encouraged John to confront the guilt that had weighed heavily on him for months. He realized that dwelling on past mistakes had been paralyzing, preventing him from fully engaging in the present. The sessions emphasized that acknowledging errors was important, but that continued reflection needed to be paired with deliberate action. John learned to forgive himself, not as an excuse for absence, but as a foundation for moving forward. This shift allowed him to approach interactions with Ethan from a place of intention and hope rather than regret and fear. Armed with these insights, John began to integrate therapy lessons into daily life. He approached each activity with Ethan play, reading therapy exercises, and meals with deliberate mindfulness. He focused on being fully present, observing subtle cues, celebrating small successes, and responding with warmth and encouragement. The impact was immediate. Ethan became more confident, expressive, and engaged. His smiles were more frequent, his curiosity more pronounced, and his willingness to initiate interaction grew steadily. John recognized that these changes were the result of not only structured activities, but also his evolving emotional presence. Reinforced by the tools he was developing through therapy, John also reflected on the interplay between his personal growth and his partnership with Mary. While she had guided him through the practical aspects of connecting with Ethan, therapy provided him with the emotional foundation to sustain and deepen that connection. He realized that learning to manage his grief, express emotion authentically, and regulate stress allowed him to engage in ways that were consistent, meaningful, and resilient. Mary's guidance and his therapy work complemented each other, creating a comprehensive support system for both father and son. Through therapy, John began to embrace a new definition of fatherhood. He understood that being a present father was not about perfection or controlling every aspect of Ethan's life. It was about consistency, empathy, and intentional engagement. It was about showing up emotionally, celebrating successes, and supporting challenges with encouragement and patience. John discovered that his presence alone could provide security and confidence for Ethan, and that emotional investment was as important as any practical caregiving task. John's commitment to personal growth also extended to long-term planning. He established routines that incorporated guided play, shared meals, reading, and therapy exercises, while also leaving space for spontaneous moments of creativity and exploration. He recognized that consistency reinforced trust, while flexibility allowed Ethan to exercise agency and initiative. Each day became a combination of structure and freedom, designed to support both emotional connection and developmental growth. Over time, John noticed a transformation in himself. He was more patient, attentive, and confident in his interactions with Ethan. He no longer avoided difficult emotions, but faced them directly, using them as tools for connection rather than barriers. His laughter returned, genuine and unrestrained, and he found joy in small moments that he had previously overlooked. He realized that his personal growth was inseparable from his ability to be present for his son. By investing in his own emotional health, he was directly enhancing Ethan's experience and well-being. The progress John observed in Ethan reinforced the value of his efforts. The boy was more expressive, engaged, and confident. He sought interaction, experimented with play, and communicated openly. Each positive change motivated John to continue his commitment to personal growth, reinforcing the understanding that emotional presence and attentive engagement were transformative. He recognized that fatherhood was a dynamic, ongoing process, requiring continuous learning, reflection, and adaptation. By embracing therapy and actively working on himself, John was able to sustain a level of presence and engagement that was previously unattainable. He had learned to navigate grief, manage stress, and express emotion authentically, creating an environment in which Ethan could thrive. Their bond strengthened daily, marked by trust, laughter, and shared experiences. John understood that the journey was ongoing, but he now had the tools, insight, and determination to remain a consistent and emotionally present father. In the end, John realized that personal growth was not a solitary achievement. It was interconnected with his relationship with Ethan, shaped by observation, reflection, guidance, and action. Therapy provided the framework for understanding himself, while his daily interactions reinforced his growth. Together, these elements created a cycle of improvement, deepening the father-son connection and fostering a household defined by trust, empathy, and joy. John had transformed not only as a caregiver but as a parent, learning that emotional presence, personal development, and consistent engagement were the keys to nurturing a resilient, happy, and confident child. Mary had been working in John's household for several months, and over that time, her presence had grown far beyond the responsibilities outlined in her contract. Initially hired as a housekeeper and caregiver, she had quickly become an essential figure in Ethan's daily life. She understood the nuances of his personality, his strengths, and his challenges, and she approached each day with patience, creativity, and dedication. John had observed her skill and empathy from the cameras and in person, but as he became more engaged and emotionally present, he began to see Mary not just as an employee, but as a trusted partner in raising his son. The transformation began gradually. Mary participated in every aspect of Ethan's day, from meals and therapy exercises to guided play and bedtime routines. She anticipated his needs and prepared activities that would challenge him, stimulate his curiosity, and encourage independence. She celebrated his successes, comforted him through frustrations, and provided a consistent presence that reinforced his sense of security. John noticed that Ethan responded to Mary not just as a caregiver, but as someone he could rely on and trust implicitly. Her integration into their daily life allowed John to observe a model of engagement and to implement the techniques he was learning through therapy and reflection. Mary's role extended beyond structured activities. She became a companion, a mentor, and a source of emotional stability. She guided Ethan through difficult moments, whether it was navigating therapy exercises, expressing complex feelings, or building confidence in new abilities. Mary's encouragement was both gentle and firm, striking a balance that allowed Ethan to feel empowered while also feeling supported. Her influence was subtle but profound. Ethan began to exhibit increased independence, initiative, and self-assurance in tasks that previously intimidated him. John recognized that Mary's consistent support provided the scaffolding for these advances, creating a foundation that he could build upon as an engaged and present father. The dynamic in the household shifted as a result of Mary's integration. The home, once marked by routine and quiet, became vibrant with activity and laughter. Shared meals transformed into opportunities for conversation and playful engagement. Therapy exercises were approached with enthusiasm and collaboration, and playtime was a period of exploration and creativity. Mary's influence was evident in every interaction, but perhaps most importantly, she facilitated and encouraged the father-son bond. John's engagement deepened as he learned to participate meaningfully alongside Mary, using her guidance to foster both Ethan's growth and their emotional connection. Mary also helped John navigate the complexities of being a present parent. She provided subtle feedback and advice, pointing out opportunities for connection that he might have overlooked and reinforcing the principles of patience, attentiveness, and empathy. Her guidance was never overbearing. Instead, it served as a support system, allowing John to experiment with new approaches and learn from experience. Over time, John developed confidence in his own abilities, understanding that he could be an emotionally engaged father while still drawing on Mary's expertise when needed. Beyond her role in structured activities, Mary became a part of the family in everyday moments. She celebrated milestones, encouraged hobbies, and participated in conversations that extended beyond caregiving. Her presence brought a sense of balance and harmony, allowing John to navigate his own emotional challenges while ensuring that Ethan's needs were met consistently. The household evolved into a space where both father and son could thrive emotionally, supported by Mary's unwavering dedication and insight. John noticed the subtle ways Mary contributed to the household's emotional climate. She remained calm during moments of frustration, offered encouragement when Ethan struggled, and celebrated both small and significant achievements with genuine enthusiasm. Her ability to remain consistent, patient, and empathetic had a stabilizing effect on both Ethan and John. For John, observing and participating in this dynamic provided a template for his own behavior, helping him internalize the principles of effective engagement, emotional availability, and active presence. Mary also facilitated social and developmental growth. She encouraged Ethan to express himself, try new activities, and build confidence in his abilities. Whether through imaginative play, collaborative projects, or guided exercises, Mary created an environment where learning was intertwined with fun and emotional support. John observed that Ethan's skills and confidence were growing, and he recognized that Mary's involvement was a critical factor in these developments. Her presence allowed John to engage more deeply with his son, fostering a collaborative approach to parenting that strengthened their bond. As John became more confident and emotionally present, he realized that Mary's role had evolved from caregiver to family member. She was no longer simply performing tasks, she was contributing to the household in a meaningful and holistic way. Her dedication, insight, and empathy shaped the daily rhythm of their lives, creating a structure in which both Ethan and John could grow. Mary's integration allowed John to experience the joys and challenges of parenthood more fully, while also ensuring that Ethan had the support and guidance he needed to thrive. The emotional impact of Mary's presence was profound. John witnessed Ethan's increased happiness, confidence, and willingness to engage, and he recognized that these improvements were a direct result of consistent care and emotional investment. Mary's influence extended beyond practical support. She nurtured Ethan's sense of self-worth, resilience, and curiosity. Her integration into the family dynamic allowed John to learn, grow, and apply these lessons, ultimately enhancing his ability to be an engaged and emotionally present father. Mary's presence also allowed John to explore and address his own emotional challenges. With her guidance, he was able to navigate difficult conversations, model appropriate emotional responses, and participate in activities that strengthened their bond. She provided a steady reference point, demonstrating the importance of empathy, patience, and active engagement, while allowing John to develop his own approach to parenting. Over time, John's confidence in his abilities increased, and he recognized that he could fulfill the role of father while benefiting from Mary's expertise and support. As the months progressed, Mary became a cornerstone of family life. She celebrated birthdays, participated in holidays, and created traditions that enriched their home. Ethan grew increasingly attached to her, seeing her as a reliable and loving figure who was always present to support, guide, and encourage him. John, in turn, developed a deeper appreciation for her role in their lives, recognizing that her presence had transformed their household into a space of joy, growth, and emotional security. The transformation in the household extended to all aspects of daily life. Meals were shared with conversation and laughter, therapy exercises were approached with enthusiasm, and playtime was interactive, dynamic, and emotionally enriching. Mary's influence ensured that Ethan's days were structured yet flexible, allowing for both achievement and exploration. John's engagement became more intuitive and confident, informed by both Mary's example and the lessons he had internalized through therapy and reflection. Ultimately, Mary's integration into the family created a system of support that benefited everyone. Ethan received consistent, empathetic care that nurtured both his physical and emotional development. John gained a partner who guided him in building meaningful interactions, strengthening his confidence as a father and allowing him to be present in ways he had not thought possible. Together, the three of them formed a family unit that balanced care, guidance, and love, illustrating the profound impact of dedication, empathy, and presence in nurturing a child's growth. Mary had become more than a caregiver. She had become a trusted member of the family, a source of stability, guidance, and affection. Her presence allowed John to fully embrace fatherhood, strengthening his bond with Ethan and fostering an environment where the child could flourish. The household had transformed into a place of laughter, learning, and emotional connection, where each member supported the others and where growth and joy were the foundations of daily life. Ethan's progress began subtly at first, small achievements that were easy to overlook but carried profound significance. The months following Laura's accident had been marked by frustration, fear, and hesitation. But the combined support of Mary and a more engaged John began to create an environment where growth was possible. Ethan started to attempt movements that he had previously avoided, reaching further for toys during playtime and experimenting with slight adjustments in his wheelchair. Each effort, no matter how minor, was met with encouragement and celebration, reinforcing the idea that his actions mattered and that he could accomplish more than he initially believed. John noticed that Ethan's confidence was increasing alongside his physical abilities. The boy was more willing to initiate play, trying new activities without waiting for guidance or reassurance. Mary had taught John the importance of celebrating effort as much as success, and this philosophy became a cornerstone of their approach. Each clumsy swing of a spoon on a pot or tentative stretch toward a building block tower was recognized as a step forward. John marveled at how much more animated Ethan had become, how his eyes sparkled with curiosity, and how his laughter returned more frequently, echoing through rooms that had once felt heavy with loss. Therapy sessions became a critical part of Ethan's development. John and Mary collaborated with physical therapists to create exercises tailored to his abilities, focusing on gradual improvements in strength, balance, and coordination. John's active involvement was a key factor. He positioned himself alongside Ethan, guiding movements, providing verbal encouragement, and celebrating every small success. Through repetition and consistent support, Ethan began to notice improvements, reinforcing his motivation and fostering a sense of agency over his own progress. The emotional progress paralleled the physical improvements. Ethan started to communicate more openly, expressing his feelings and ideas without hesitation. He laughed more freely, asked questions, and showed curiosity about the world around him. These changes were deeply encouraging to John, who realized that emotional growth was intertwined with physical development. Each moment of expression, whether through words, gestures, or play, strengthened the bond between father and son. John saw that confidence and autonomy were as essential to Ethan's well-being as any physical therapy or structured exercise. Mary played an essential role in fostering this growth. She had an intuitive understanding of how to challenge Ethan without causing frustration, how to celebrate effort without emphasizing perfection, and how to create an environment that encouraged experimentation. Her methods encouraged John to participate actively, providing guidance and modeling engagement while allowing Ethan to take initiative. Together, they established a rhythm of support that balanced structure with freedom, allowing Ethan to grow at his own pace while feeling secure and motivated. Ethan began to show improvements in mobility that had seemed impossible just months before. Small exercises, such as lifting his arms, shifting his weight, and pushing the wheelchair independently, became achievements celebrated by both John and Mary. Each success boosted Ethan's self-esteem and demonstrated the power of consistent, supportive engagement. John found himself filled with pride and gratitude, realizing that these small victories were the result of collective effort, patience, and emotional connection. Beyond physical milestones, Ethan's emotional resilience strengthened. He responded to challenges with curiosity rather than fear, experimented with problem-solving during play, and demonstrated perseverance when tasks were difficult. Mary and John encouraged this resilience, using every setback as an opportunity to reinforce effort, celebrate persistence, and maintain positivity. Ethan's developing confidence created a feedback loop. The more he trusted in his abilities, the more he attempted, and the more progress he made both physically and emotionally. John also observed that Ethan's relationship with him had deepened significantly. Where previously the boy had been hesitant, reserved, or cautious, he now sought John's engagement, responded to encouragement, and shared moments of joy and curiosity. The combination of guided play, consistent emotional presence, and patient encouragement created a sense of security that allowed Ethan to take risks, experiment with new movements, and express himself authentically. Each smile, laugh, or proud gesture reinforced the father-son bond and confirmed that John's efforts to engage fully were effective. As Ethan's abilities improved, daily routines became more interactive and rewarding. Mealtime was a shared experience, with Ethan helping to prepare food and John providing guidance and encouragement. Therapy exercises became collaborative challenges, often turning into playful competitions that motivated Ethan to attempt movements he had previously resisted. Even small daily tasks, like reaching for a toy or adjusting a blanket, became exercises in independence and confidence. John recognized that these everyday activities, when approached intentionally, were critical to both physical rehabilitation and emotional development. The emotional environment in the household had shifted dramatically. Laughter became more frequent, shared activities were infused with curiosity and creativity, and moments of frustration were addressed with patience and encouragement rather than pressure or disappointment. Mary's presence remained central, providing support, guidance, and expertise, while John's increased engagement created a consistent framework for growth. Together, they fostered a household where progress was celebrated, effort was valued, and emotional connection was prioritized. John also began to document Ethan's milestones, keeping notes on improvements, challenges, and areas for growth. These records were not just practical, they reinforced the sense of achievement for both Ethan and John. Celebrating each milestone, however minor, became an essential part of the process, reinforcing the lessons that effort, persistence, and emotional support were key to development. John marveled at the resilience and determination his son displayed, recognizing that these qualities were nurtured by the combined influence of consistent care, emotional presence, and guided engagement. Over time, Ethan began to attempt more ambitious movements, experimenting with partial standing, stretching, and transferring independently with support. These successes, though incremental, were monumental in terms of confidence and self-esteem. John and Mary encouraged him at every step, celebrating achievements and reinforcing the connection between effort and accomplishment. Ethan's growing independence inspired John to continue his personal growth, maintaining emotional availability and patience, and reinforcing the principles he had learned through therapy, observation, and reflection. Ethan's progress extended to social and cognitive aspects as well. He began initiating interactions, expressing preferences, and demonstrating creativity during play. The emotional bond between father and son strengthened further, as John's consistent engagement provided a secure foundation for exploration, risk-taking, and communication. Mary's guidance ensured that these experiences were structured and supportive, providing feedback and encouragement that reinforced learning and confidence. By the end of the period of intensive engagement and support, the transformation was unmistakable. Ethan's physical abilities had improved measurably, his emotional expression was richer, and his confidence and independence were growing steadily. The household was alive with activity, laughter, and shared accomplishments, a testament to the power of consistent support, guided engagement, and emotional presence. John felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment, realizing that the collective effort of himself and Mary had enabled his son to thrive despite the challenges imposed by the accident. Ultimately, Ethan's progress was not just a matter of physical recovery. It was a holistic transformation encompassing emotional resilience, confidence, independence, and the ability to engage meaningfully with those around him. John recognized that this growth was the product of sustained effort, emotional investment, and collaboration, highlighting the importance of consistent presence, encouragement, and support. The combination of Mary's expertise, John's active engagement, and a nurturing environment created the conditions for Ethan to flourish, illustrating the profound impact of love, guidance, and attentive care on a child's development. After months of emotional effort, guided play, and therapy, John began to feel a shift in the household's energy. The weight that had once hung over the home, a constant reminder of loss and trauma, was slowly lifting. Laughter became more frequent, and the routines that had previously felt burdensome transformed into opportunities for connection and shared joy. Ethan's growth, physical, emotional, and cognitive, was now visible not just in structured exercises, but in his daily interactions. His playful curiosity, and the confidence he displayed in attempting new challenges. John realized that these changes reflected more than Ethan's progress. They were a testament to the family's ability to rebuild a sense of normalcy and happiness after unimaginable loss. John's approach to parenting had matured profoundly. Where he once operated with caution, fear, and detachment, he now embraced each moment with attention, empathy, and intentionality. The household rhythm had shifted to prioritize shared activities, consistent emotional engagement, and flexibility to accommodate Ethan's needs. Mealtime became a family event with laughter, conversation, and playful interaction at the center. Breakfast was no longer a hurried affair but an opportunity to discuss plans, share stories, and connect emotionally before starting the day. John discovered that these moments, although simple, had a powerful impact on Ethan's sense of security and belonging. Playtime, too, evolved into a central pillar of their household life. Guided by the lessons he had learned from Mary, John actively participated in imaginative games, creative projects, and interactive exercises that challenged Ethan while allowing him to lead at times. The boys' laughter filled rooms that had once been quiet and tense, and John felt the profound satisfaction of seeing his son confident, joyful, and fully engaged with the world around him. Each day's activities were a mix of structured support and spontaneous exploration, allowing Ethan to develop physically and emotionally while reinforcing the bond between father and son. Mary's role continued to be vital in establishing stability and happiness. She acted as a mentor, guide, and partner, providing insight and support to ensure the household environment was nurturing and balanced. Her presence allowed John to maintain consistency in routines, play, and emotional support, while also giving him the space to develop his own parenting style. Together they created a dynamic in which Ethan felt secure, valued, and encouraged to explore his abilities. Mary's guidance reinforced the principles of empathy, attention, and engagement that had become central to the family's daily life. The family's emotional climate improved significantly. Frustration and anxiety, which had been common in the early months after the accident, were replaced by trust, understanding, and patience. Ethan began initiating interactions, expressing ideas, and sharing emotions without hesitation. John responded with warmth and attentiveness, reinforcing these positive behaviors and fostering an environment where both father and son could thrive. The home became a place where mistakes were opportunities for learning, effort was celebrated, and every achievement, no matter how small, was acknowledged. As stability returned, John began to notice the subtler signs of progress in Ethan's independence and confidence. The boy was taking initiative during play, attempting more complex physical tasks, and expressing preferences and decisions in daily activities. Therapy exercises that once caused frustration became manageable challenges, approached with enthusiasm and curiosity. Ethan's growing sense of agency was a reflection of the supportive environment cultivated by John and Mary, where encouragement, guidance, and emotional presence created conditions for sustained growth. Family routines were also enriched by shared activities beyond play and therapy. Storytime, walks, simple household chores, and even creative projects like drawing or building with blocks became opportunities for connection. John intentionally structured these experiences to provide both learning and emotional support, allowing Ethan to practice skills while deepening their bond. These small, consistent interactions reinforced a sense of normalcy, stability, and shared purpose within the household, which was critical to rebuilding happiness. John also embraced the importance of celebrating milestones. He took note of Ethan's achievements, from improved mobility to new expressions of confidence, and recognized the cumulative effect these successes had on the family's emotional well-being. Milestones became shared victories, moments where father, son, and Mary acknowledged effort, perseverance, and progress. These celebrations fostered pride, motivation, and joy, creating positive reinforcement that strengthened both individual growth and familial bonds. The family began to establish traditions that reinforced stability and joy. Weekly activities such as movie nights, shared baking sessions, or themed play days provided predictable structures that Ethan could anticipate and participate in enthusiastically. These traditions became rituals that reinforced the family's connection, created memories, and established a sense of continuity that had been disrupted by trauma. John realized that the combination of routine, engagement, and shared experiences was foundational to creating a resilient, happy family environment. Social interactions also improved. John encouraged Ethan to participate in group activities, attend playdates, and interact with peers when possible, guided by Mary's insight into his readiness and confidence. These experiences reinforced social skills, empathy, and cooperation while allowing Ethan to experience success outside the home environment. John observed how these interactions contributed to Ethan's overall happiness, reinforcing the effectiveness of the stable, supportive home environment they had cultivated. John's own sense of fulfillment and stability grew alongside Ethan's. The progress they had made together, supported by Mary's guidance, gave him confidence in his role as a father. He understood that emotional presence, patience, and intentional engagement were as critical to parenting as any physical care or logistical planning. The ability to respond to Ethan's needs, celebrate achievements, and navigate challenges together reinforced a sense of purpose and joy that had been absent in the months following Laura's accident. The household dynamic, once defined by caution, grief, and distance, transformed into one characterized by mutual support, engagement, and emotional richness. John observed that as Ethan's confidence and happiness increased, the overall atmosphere of the home improved. Laughter, curiosity, and playful experimentation became central to daily life. The family had moved beyond mere survival and was actively cultivating an environment of growth, trust, and joy. John and Mary continued to collaborate closely, ensuring that Ethan's needs were met consistently while also encouraging John's engagement. Their teamwork reinforced stability and created a sustainable support system for the family. John recognized that rebuilding happiness and stability required ongoing effort, attention, and reflection, but he was now equipped with the skills, insight, and experience to maintain it. Over time, the family developed a rhythm that balanced structure with flexibility, learning with play, and support with independence. Each day became an opportunity to reinforce connection, celebrate progress, and deepen trust. Ethan's increasing mobility, emotional expression, and confidence were tangible evidence of the family's collective effort, highlighting the power of consistent care, engagement, and love. Ultimately, the family's journey toward rebuilding happiness and stability demonstrated that even after profound loss, resilience, intentional effort, and emotional connection could transform lives. John, Ethan, and Mary had created a household where growth, trust, and joy were central, establishing a foundation for continued development and fulfillment. The home had become a place where each member's presence, support, and engagement contributed to a shared sense of security, belonging, and happiness, illustrating the transformative power of care, love, and commitment. Months had passed since John first installed the cameras, seeking reassurance about Ethan's safety. In that time, their household had undergone a profound transformation. The days of uncertainty, anxiety, and emotional distance seemed distant now, replaced by a rhythm defined by laughter, shared experiences, and mutual trust. John reflected on the journey they had undertaken, recognizing that the process of healing and rebuilding their family had been gradual, intentional, and guided by love, patience, and presence. Each milestone they had achieved together was a testament to the resilience of both father and son, as well as to the unwavering support of Mary, who had become an indispensable part of their lives. Ethan had flourished in ways that John had once feared were impossible. His physical abilities had improved, his confidence had grown, and his emotional expression had become vivid and authentic. No longer hesitant or withdrawn, he approached each day with curiosity and enthusiasm, eager to explore, learn, and interact. Simple actions, once monumental challenges, now represented triumphs, reaching for a toy, experimenting with a new movement, or initiating play with his father. Each success was celebrated with joy, reinforcing his sense of agency and accomplishment. John watched these moments with a mixture of pride, amazement, and gratitude, realizing that the combination of consistent care, emotional engagement, and encouragement had created an environment in which Ethan could truly thrive. The emotional bond between father and son had reached a depth that John had once thought unattainable. Where he had previously hesitated, unsure how to navigate the aftermath of tragedy, he now engaged with Ethan openly and authentically. He participated in play, guided therapy exercises, read stories aloud with expression and warmth, and shared meals filled with conversation and laughter. Every action reflected a deliberate choice to be present, attentive, and emotionally available. Ethan responded in kind, demonstrating trust, joy, and a willingness to explore both the world and his own abilities. Their relationship had evolved from one constrained by fear and grief to one characterized by connection, collaboration, and love. Mary's integration into the family had played an instrumental role in this transformation. She had become more than a caregiver. She was a mentor, a partner, and a source of stability and insight. Her guidance had shaped John's approach to parenting, offering strategies, encouragement, and constructive feedback that allowed him to grow as a father. She had provided a consistent, compassionate presence for Ethan, creating an environment in which the boy could experiment, learn, and succeed. Over time, her influence had helped both John and Ethan develop confidence, resilience, and a sense of security that anchored the household. Mary had become part of the family not by formal declaration, but through the deep and lasting bonds she had cultivated through care, dedication, and empathy. The household itself reflected this sense of renewal. Rooms were alive with activity, toys and books were used regularly, craft projects adorned tables, and music and laughter filled the air. John had embraced routines that balanced structure with flexibility, allowing Ethan to develop independence while still receiving consistent support. Family activities, once rare or awkward, were now integral to daily life. Meals, play, and shared projects became moments of connection and mutual joy, reinforcing bonds and creating lasting memories. The home, which had once been marked by grief and apprehension, had become a place of warmth, stability, and love. Ethan's social development had also benefited from this renewed environment. With Mary and John providing guidance and encouragement, he began interacting more confidently with peers, expressing himself through conversation, play, and collaborative activities. He was learning to navigate challenges, problem solve, and communicate his needs and ideas effectively. John observed these interactions with satisfaction, understanding that the foundation of emotional security and consistent support had enabled his son to develop the skills and confidence necessary to engage meaningfully with others. Each success outside the home reinforced the importance of the stable, nurturing environment they had built together. John himself had undergone a transformation that paralleled Ethan's. Through therapy, self-reflection, and active engagement, he had learned to navigate his grief, express his emotions authentically, and maintain a consistent presence for his son. He no longer approached parenting with hesitation or fear, but with confidence, intention, and joy. He had learned that presence, attention, and empathy were as crucial to his son's well-being as any physical care or therapy exercise. By committing to personal growth and applying the lessons he had learned from Mary, John had become the father he had always wanted to be: engaged, attentive, and deeply connected to his son. The milestones they achieved together were numerous and meaningful. Ethan's increasing independence in movement, his ability to participate in therapy exercises with confidence, and his willingness to initiate interactions all marked tangible signs of growth. But beyond these measurable accomplishments, the family had cultivated something far more significant: trust, emotional security, and a sense of shared joy. John realized that these elements were the true markers of success, the foundation for a lifelong bond that could withstand challenges and adapt to the uncertainties of life. Celebrations became an integral part of their family life. Each small achievement was acknowledged with praise, shared smiles, and sometimes playful rituals. Birthdays, holidays, and even ordinary accomplishments like completing a puzzle or mastering a new movement became opportunities for recognition and emotional reinforcement. John understood that these celebrations were not superficial. They were essential for reinforcing self-esteem, emotional security, and familial cohesion. Mary's presence in these moments further enriched the experience, blending guidance with genuine affection and support. The emotional climate of the household was now one of positivity, trust, and resilience. Challenges were met with collaboration rather than frustration, setbacks were approached as opportunities to learn, and moments of joy were actively sought and celebrated. Ethan's growing confidence and engagement were mirrored by John's ability to respond empathetically and consistently. Together they had created a dynamic that nurtured both the child's development and the father's emotional growth, illustrating the transformative power of care, presence, and intentional engagement. John reflected on the journey they had undertaken, recognizing the significance of each step. From the initial decision to install cameras, through observing Mary engaging in guided play, embracing therapy, and developing emotional openness, each action had contributed to the restoration of the family's bond. He understood that rebuilding a household after trauma required patience, intentionality, and collaboration. The combined efforts of John, Mary, and Ethan had created an environment in which each member could flourish, demonstrating the cumulative impact of dedication, empathy, and love. The culmination of their journey was evident not only in Ethan's achievements, but in the overall quality of life within the household. The family had transitioned from a period of uncertainty and withdrawal to one of vitality, engagement, and happiness. The bonds between father and son were strong, resilient, and rooted in trust. Mary's role had evolved from caregiver to family member, providing guidance, support, and affection that enhanced the household dynamic. Together, they had created a home defined by connection, stability, and joy. Looking to the future, John felt a sense of confidence and hope he had not experienced in years. He knew that challenges would continue to arise, that progress might be uneven, and that growth required ongoing effort. But he also recognized that the foundation they had built was strong. The skills, habits, and emotional resilience they had cultivated would allow the family to navigate difficulties while maintaining connection, trust, and happiness. John understood that their story was not only about recovery but about the creation of a family dynamic capable of enduring, thriving, and evolving. Ultimately, the family had achieved what once seemed impossible: a restored sense of normalcy, stability, and joy. Ethan's growth, John's emotional presence, and Mary's dedication had coalesced into a harmonious household where love, support, and connection were central. The journey from grief, fear, and distance to confidence, engagement, and happiness demonstrated the transformative power of care, empathy, and perseverance. Together they had rebuilt a life defined not by the tragedy they had endured, but by the strength, resilience, and love they cultivated every day. The story of John, Ethan, and Mary offers profound lessons on parenting, resilience, and the transformative power of presence and empathy. One of the clearest takeaways is that emotional connection is as critical, if not more so, than physical care. John's initial focus on safety, routine, and efficiency, though well-intentioned, was insufficient to meet Ethan's deeper needs. The narrative emphasizes that children, particularly those recovering from trauma or dealing with physical limitations, require a consistent presence that blends attention, patience, and emotional engagement. It is through these small, deliberate interactions, shared play, encouragement during challenges, and active participation in daily routines that trust and confidence are cultivated. Mary's role exemplifies how authentic engagement, responsiveness to subtle cues, and creative encouragement can unlock a child's potential and facilitate healing. Another lesson from the story is the necessity of self-awareness and personal growth for effective parenting. John's journey illustrates that unresolved grief, fear, or guilt can unintentionally create barriers between parent and child. Through therapy, reflection, and guidance, he learned to confront his emotions, process trauma, and develop tools to remain present and emotionally available. This demonstrates that parental development is not merely about providing care, but also about cultivating emotional intelligence and resilience. The narrative highlights that parents must often confront their vulnerabilities and limitations to become fully capable of nurturing their children, and that seeking support, whether through professional help or trusted mentors like Mary, is a vital step toward meaningful connection. The story also underscores the importance of patience and consistency in fostering long-term growth. Ethan's physical and emotional progress did not occur overnight. It was the product of sustained effort, repeated encouragement, and a supportive environment. Small successes, celebrated and reinforced, accumulated into meaningful development over time. This illustrates a broader life lesson: growth, whether in children, relationships, or personal development, is incremental and requires consistent, deliberate effort. By embracing this philosophy, John was able to rebuild trust, enhance his son's confidence, and create a resilient foundation for the family's future. Consistency, combined with empathy and guidance, proves more impactful than sporadic or superficial attention. Another central lesson is the transformative power of collaborative support. The story shows that parenting, particularly under challenging circumstances, does not have to be a solitary endeavor. Mary's involvement provided expertise, guidance, and emotional insight that John alone could not offer initially. Her presence complemented John's growing capabilities, allowing the household to function as a cohesive unit where each member contributed to growth, emotional stability, and happiness. This teaches that seeking and accepting help, mentoring, and collaboration can amplify effectiveness in parenting, caregiving, and even in broader aspects of life. Collective effort, when guided by empathy and care, creates outcomes far greater than the sum of individual contributions. Finally, the story conveys the idea that love is most powerful when it is active and intentional. It is not enough to feel affection or concern for someone. Love must be expressed through action, engagement, and responsiveness. John's journey from withdrawal to active presence demonstrates that love manifests in the small, everyday moments, celebrating a child's achievements, participating in play, listening attentively, and providing encouragement. This principle extends beyond parenthood, suggesting that meaningful relationships in any context thrive when attention, care, and deliberate effort accompany genuine affection. The story ultimately affirms that with empathy, presence, and patience, even the deepest wounds can be healed, trust can be rebuilt, and joy can be restored within families and communities. Collectively, the narrative provides a blueprint for resilience, growth, and relational healing. It emphasizes that emotional presence, personal growth, patience, collaboration, and active love are essential components of nurturing not only children but also the people we care for most deeply. By embracing these principles, individuals can transform challenges into opportunities for connection, empowerment, and lasting fulfillment. John and Ethan's story illustrates that even in the aftermath of tragedy, deliberate effort, empathy, and guidance can restore harmony, strengthen bonds, and cultivate a home defined by trust, joy, and emotional security. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.